Tranquility base here. The Eagle has landed. Those words, spoken on July 20th, 1969, marked humanity's greatest leap beyond its cradle. In that single transmission, centuries of dreams, inventions, and sacrifices converged into one breathtaking moment when humankind touched the moon. But behind that historic step lay a story of risk, rivalry, and relentless science. It began not with peace but with fear. The year was 1957. The world watched in awe and terror as a tiny sphere called Sputnik 1 streaked across the sky. It was the first man-made object to orbit Earth, and it bore the insignia of the Soviet Union. The space age had begun, and America had just lost the first round. 4 years later, another shock. Yuri Gagarin, a Soviet cosmonaut, became the first human in space. In Washington, President John F. Kennedy looked to his advisors and asked a question that would change history. What can we do that will beat the Soviets? The answer, delivered weeks later, was audacious: to send a human being to the moon and bring them safely home. On May 25, 1961, Kennedy declared, "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal. Before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon." Those words were not just a promise, they were a countdown. In the early 1960s, computers filled entire rooms and had less memory than a digital wristwatch today. The idea of navigating 400,000 kilometers through space seemed impossible. Yet NASA mobilized over 400,000 people to make it real. The Apollo program was born, consuming more than 4% of the U.S. federal budget. They had to build new rockets, new computers, and new rules for survival. Every single bolt had to work perfectly. Progress was swift and costly. On January 27, 1967, during a routine test, a spark ignited the pure oxygen atmosphere inside the Apollo 1 command module. Astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee perished. NASA was devastated. The program paused, redesigned, and rebuilt from tragedy, learning hard lessons that would later save lives on Apollo 11. Then, in December 1968, Apollo 8 carried 3 astronauts around the moon and back. For the first time, people saw the Earth rising over the lunar horizon, a fragile blue marble adrift in blackness. That image, Earthrise, forever changed how we saw ourselves. 2 more missions, Apollo 9 and 10, rehearsed docking and tested the lunar module, the small craft that would actually land. Each flight brought NASA closer to the edge of the possible. July 16, 1969, at Cape Kennedy, Florida, the world held its breath. Towering 110 meters above the launch pad stood the Saturn V, the most powerful rocket ever built. At 9:32 a.m., Mission Control gave the final countdown. 3, 2, 1. 0. All engines running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. Flames brighter than the sun erupted as the rocket rose, shaking the Earth for miles. On board were Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, 3 men carrying humanity's hopes to another world. In less than 12 minutes, they reached orbit. The third stage fired again, performing the translunar injection, a precise burn sending them on a 3-day voyage to the moon. During the journey, Armstrong later said, "It suddenly struck me that tiny pea, pretty and blue, was the Earth. I put up my thumb and shut one eye, and my thumb blotted out the planet Earth. I didn't feel like a giant. I felt very, very small." On July 19th, Apollo 11 slipped into lunar orbit. The next day, Armstrong and Aldrin entered the lunar module, nicknamed Eagle, while Collins remained in the command module Columbia, circling above. On July 20th, the Eagle began its descent. Almost immediately, warning alarms 1201 and 1202 glared through the cabin. The guidance computer was overloaded. In Houston, engineers quickly confirmed critical systems were still running. "Eagle, your go," came the calm voice from Mission Control. Armstrong peered through the window. The computer's chosen landing site was strewn with massive boulders. With only seconds of fuel left, he switched to manual control, guiding the craft over the cratered surface. At 8:17 p.m. UTC, Armstrong's calm voice broke the tension. "Houston, Tranquility base here. The Eagle has landed," applause erupted. Humanity was on the moon. Hours later, Armstrong opened the hatch. As he squeezed through the narrow exit, his backpack struck a fragile toggle, the ascent engine arming switch. The small plastic piece snapped off. Neither astronaut noticed. Descending the ladder, Armstrong paused. Cameras transmitted his image live to 650 million people. He stepped down and spoke the immortal words, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." Moments later, Aldrin joined him, describing the surface as magnificent desolation. For 2.5 hours, they collected lunar rocks, set up experiments, and planted the American flag, leaving a plaque that read, "We came in peace for all mankind." When they returned to the Eagle, they discovered the broken switch. Without it, they couldn't ignite the engine to leave the moon. Panic flickered. Then Aldrin had an idea. He took out a felt-tip pen, carefully inserted it into the circuit opening, and completed the connection. With that improvised fix, they started the engine. Humanity's return from the moon depended on a simple pen. The Eagle rose from the lunar surface and rejoined Collins in orbit. They transferred their precious cargo to Columbia for the long trip home. On July 24th, the spacecraft approached Earth at 39,000 kilometers per hour, enduring temperatures hotter than molten steel. 3 parachutes deployed, slowing the capsule to a gentle splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. Against impossible odds, all 3 men had survived. Fearing lunar microbes, NASA quarantined the astronauts for 21 days. Soon, scientists confirmed there was no danger. President Nixon greeted them, saying, "Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world." Around the globe, people celebrated not America's victory, but humanity's, yet even as the dust settled, doubts began to rise. Could it have been faked? Some pointed to the fluttering flag, missing stars, and odd shadows. But science offers clear answers. The flag had a horizontal rod to make it stand out in the airless environment. When twisted into the soil, it rippled, then stood still, the missing stars a matter of camera exposure. The brilliantly lit lunar surface meant the cameras couldn't capture faint starlight. As for the shadows, the uneven lunar surface reflects light in all directions, creating distorted perspectives. Even the Soviet Union, America's rival, tracked Apollo 11's radio signals and confirmed the event. Today, laser retroreflectors left on the moon by Apollo missions still bounce beams fired from Earth-tangible proof that we were there. Beyond national pride, Apollo transformed technology. The demand for lightweight computers and reliable microchips forced innovation at an incredible speed. The price of integrated circuits fell over 90% in 5 years, laying the foundation for modern computing. Every smartphone and GPS today carries Apollo's DNA. The lunar samples revealed the moon likely formed from debris blasted off Earth after a colossal impact billions of years ago. Yet success came at a price. By the early 1970s, public enthusiasm waned. Budget cuts canceled the final missions. In December 1972, Apollo 17 became the last crewed flight to the moon. The era of lunar exploration went dark for half a century. 50 years later, a new generation looks upward once again. NASA's Artemis program aims to return humans to the moon, this time to stay. Artemis I launched in 2022, and upcoming missions will land the first woman and first person of color on the lunar surface. Unlike Apollo, Artemis is a collaboration, working with private companies and international partners to build habitats and prepare for the next great leap. Mars, when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon, he carried a mirror of humanity's paradoxes, our capacity for war and wonder, destruction and discovery. The mission was born from rivalry, but became a symbol of unity. It showed that the same intellect used to wage wars could also lift us beyond them. Science, when fueled by courage, can turn impossibility into history. Today, that footprint still rests undisturbed in lunar dust, waiting for new footprints to join it. It's a reminder of who we are, explorers, dreamers, and the species that dared to touch the sky. Beyond the flag planting and national pride, the Apollo program quietly sparked a revolution right here on Earth. Think about the phone in your pocket. The Apollo missions needed computers, but the computers of the 1960s were gigantic. NASA demanded lightweight, reliable microchips, forcing companies like IBM and Fairchild Semiconductor into overdrive. They had to shrink everything down, make it more powerful, and make it tough enough to survive a trip to space. This intense pressure caused the price of integrated circuits, the brains of modern electronics to plummet by over 90% in just 5 years. That innovation didn't just get us to the moon. It laid the very foundation for the digital world we live in. Every smartphone, every GPS navigation system, every life-saving medical device carries a piece of Apollo's DNA. But the legacy goes deeper. The rocks brought back by the astronauts weren't just souvenirs. They were keys to our solar system's past. By studying them, scientists figured out that our moon was likely born 4.5 billion years ago when a massive object, the size of Mars, collided with a young Earth, and the seismometers left behind on the lunar surface. They detected moonquakes, revealing that even our silent gray neighbor isn't entirely still. Apollo didn't just take us to a new world. It opened up entirely new fields of science. Yet this golden age of exploration couldn't last forever. By the early 1970s, the mood back home had shifted. The Vietnam War was raging, and many Americans began to question why billions were being spent on space when there were so many problems on Earth, like poverty and inequality. Public enthusiasm faded, and so did the funding. NASA had planned missions all the way up to Apollo 20, but the final 3 were canceled. In December 1972, the crew of Apollo 17 lifted off from the lunar surface, becoming the last humans to walk on the moon. For half a century, the era of lunar exploration went dark. But now, 50 years later, a new dawn is breaking. A new generation is looking up at the moon, not as a distant memory, but as a destination. NASA's Artemis program, aptly named after Apollo's twin sister in Greek mythology, is gearing up to take us back. This time, the goal isn't just to visit. It's to stay. Artemis I successfully launched in 2022, sending an uncrewed Orion spacecraft on a journey around the moon to test the new hardware. The next mission, Artemis II, will carry astronauts on that same path, paving the way for Artemis III. This historic mission, planned for later this decade, will land the first woman and the first person of color on the lunar surface. But this isn't the Apollo-era space race. Artemis is a global collaboration. NASA is partnering with private companies like SpaceX and international space agencies to build the Lunar Gateway, a small space station that will orbit the moon. This outpost will be a stepping stone, a base camp for building habitats, studying lunar resources like water ice, and preparing for humanity's next giant leap, Mars. When Neil Armstrong took that first small step, he embodied a fundamental truth about humanity. We are a species of incredible contrasts capable of both conflict and wonder, destruction and discovery. The Apollo program was born from a fierce rivalry, but it ended up as a symbol of what we can achieve when we unite. It proved that the same drive and intellect that builds weapons can also lift us beyond our worldly disputes. Today, that first footprint remains on the moon, perfectly preserved in the airless environment, a silent testament to our audacity. It's waiting for new footprints to join it, not as a display of dominance, but as a tribute to our shared, unending quest for knowledge. As we prepare to return, we remember that single step and echo that still ripples through time and space, reminding us of who we are at our very best. Explorers, dreamers, and the species that dared to reach for the stars. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this journey through space and time, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about science and exploration. See you next time.